Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another edition of A Voice for Men Radio, the show that reminds men and women that no means no and nullify means not guilty. I'm John the Other. Girl Writes What is also here, and I know who it is you really want to hear from, not me. But tonight's show is So You Say You Want a Matriarchy. We're going to examine that rhetorical question tonight. But in order to get to it in a logical way, a few other factors need examination, including some criticism of women. Now, before anybody's head explodes, I'll point out, as I must do in such this tedious fashion, that criticism of women is not automatically sexism. And in fact, if we hold any group of people exempt from criticism, we are implicitly denying that they are human, that is, subject to all the fallibilities and failures of character that everybody else is subject to. And this does nobody any favors. Certainly, it does no favors to women. But in a literal patriarchy, which, in spite of the claims of mainstream feminist commentators, we do not now live in, but in a patriarchy, property, in particular productive land, is owned paternally and is passed through inheritance from fathers to sons. This has the consequence that it provides real motivation for men to follow a socially responsible behavior pattern because they have ownership. Men are motivated in such a system to steward the assets of property, maintaining or increasing the productive value of land or any other means of production. Everybody else also benefits from this, including women, who in Western patriarchal social systems attach themselves to men of high stability or high social responsibility and respectability. And this is the basis for stable and prosperous communities. Social pathology, such as vandalism or delinquent behavior in young people, banditry, and other criminal behavior is disincentivized by social pressure in a patriarchal culture which follows this pattern. By contrast, a matriarchal culture follows a different pattern, not exactly the opposite along sexual lines of the patriarchy we've just discussed. And the reason for this is because of the obvious fact that women control reproduction, they produce babies, and control access to sex, but also the dirty and much denied secret that nobody likes to talk about, and that is female hypergamy. For those people unacquainted with this term, it is simply the natural tendency of women to be attracted to males of higher social or higher economic status than themselves. If anybody would like to deny that this tendency exists in women, you know, the old not all women are like that set aside, yes, it does. By all means, call into the show to tell us we are wrong. The number is 310-388-9709. But what is the consequence of female hypergamy in a matriarchal society? If we accept that women are naturally attracted to men of higher social or higher economic status than themselves, we must recognize that in a matriarchy in which primary ownership of property is female, this eliminates the disincentive for women to discard men after they've coupled to produce children. That disincentive which exists in a patriarchal society, that is to say where primary property ownership is controlled by men. In a society of male property ownership, women are demotivated to break the social bonds with men because in doing so they lose the social or economic upward move that they enjoyed by coupling with higher status men. And remember, this entire argument hinges on accepting that female hypergamy exists, that women have a natural tendency to seek relationships with men who are of higher status than themselves. I don't think this is in doubt. And of course, the question is open. Anybody who wants to can disagree. However, if you call into the show simply to say not all women are like that, you'll be wasting everybody's time. All generalizations have exceptions, including this one. The potential loss of economic and social status and the loss of access to male-owned property, which would follow dissolving a male relationship in a patriarchy, in the matriarchal society, this disincentive does not exist. But the hypergamous drive to move on to another higher status male remains. And this drives behavior of women in a matriarchal culture. This produces some outcomes we might even recognize in our own society. One of them is a growing culture of single motherhood. This sounds innocuous, but the other side of that coin is fatherlessness. We characterize this with pejorative language in our media by using the term deadbeat dads, while ignoring the fact that the majority of divorces are filed by women. not because of some major breach of the marriage, such as violence or paternal fecklessness, or any other deal-breaking behavior, but just the rather vague sense of dissatisfaction within an otherwise functional marriage. This is female hypergamy in action, incentivized by 50 years of innovation in the family courts. Why keep a nice guy around when you can keep a fraction of his income and put yourself back on the market for something with a higher value or a higher income or shinier or he's taller or better looking or younger, what have you? Fatherlessness has some pretty dire consequences for children too, including increased statistical incidence of failure in school, criminal behavior, depression and other mood disorders, and ultimately antisocial behavior in the adulthood of those fatherless children. One of the byproducts of this type of social system is thug culture. This is what happens when men and boys have no other socially constructive path to positive identity within the system. Thug culture fills the social void left by a matriarchal culture for male social acceptance. This is not only easily understandable in a theoretical model, it's obvious when we look at the culture of fatherlessness created in the pseudo-matriarchies created by female-incentivized divorce and the family courts and the misandric, male-vilifying system of law, prejudice, and domestic policy. Thug culture is the result of these types of policies. And despite this, anti-male legislation and policies are escalated when the results are addressed, which exacerbates the problem rather than reducing it. But where does this ultimately lead us? To a broken and a dysfunctional society, which creates dysfunctional citizens and an ever-growing segment of unproductive members of society whose only paths to social acceptance is within this violent subculture. I will hazard that ultimately, taken to extremes, this leads to the warlord model of regional government and collapse of the functioning of a civil society. Girl writes what? You have something on to add here, don't you?
Well, I mean, I just, as far as what the social consequences are of what you're saying, I think even beyond that, when you look at the consequences to women, when you look at ownership, you own things, you are then responsible for them. And I think a lot of the feminist complaints and a lot of the feminist attention that's paid to things like women in Africa, where women carry 80% of the water and they do 80% of the work, and the men own the land and earn the money. I think this is really actually sort of the kind of matriarchal culture that you would find in a Pride of Lions, where the male lion spends most of his day lying around. The females do all of the hunting. He gets to eat first. He's the only one who can defend the territory. And men in Africa own the land because they can defend the territory, but they're not invested in children. And because they're not invested in their children, then they don't contribute to the degree that they would if they were individually invested in their own children. And I think one of the main negative points of matriarchy is that it forces a huge amount, a disproportionate amount of the work, the labor, onto women. And you can see this in the black community in the United States, where 60% of children are born to single mothers, where they're really like, we need help, we are struggling, we have all of this response. But honestly, that's because men don't own their children in that culture. If you don't own something, then you're not responsible for it.
So I'm in my little opening rant there, I was really talking about ownership of productive land in an agricultural economy, ownership of property. I may be slightly off base.
If you remove ownership of property altogether from men and you place it in the hands of women, that's never going to sustain itself. Simply because men are physically more capable of enforcing their individual will. Women will be so busy with subsisting and supporting their children and just getting by day to day that, and men will probably only have to expend 20%, 30% of their energy to get by as individuals, and the rest of that time can be spent taking over and defending land.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to get there. I want to back up a little bit, though, and talk about, in more detail, ownership of children. Now, I don't mean ownership as in that children are objects to be owned like possessions, but custodianship of children is really what we're talking about in a whether it's matriarchal or patriarchal. If fathers are disenfranchised from the family, if they're ejected, or if they can be easily ejected based on a whim of the other participant in the family structure, then we have this same conversation. Rather than the initial rant talking about it as who owns the farm, who owns the land, it's investment in the family. If a father can be easily separated from the family without much hazard to the person trying to separate them, then where is there a social motivation for fathers to actually remain involved with the family, to actually be the pillars of the community that you need some men to be in order to have a viable community? There's
no point investing in something that does not benefit you in some way. There just really isn't. And one thing that major issue that I have with the fact that under the old system, if a woman had a child out of wedlock, that was her child, it was her responsibility. And now, despite the fact that she has all of these options and all of these ways of avoiding single motherhood, it is now his responsibility as well, whether he wants it or not. And he has no paternal rights, no nothing, just responsibility. This is not a viable system. You cannot say pay into the Canada pension plan your entire life, but wait, you don't qualify for it. You don't qualify to receive the benefits.
Or the better
You're investing
argument,
in everybody else, and we're going to force you.
Yeah.
But you don't get to see any of the benefit from that. And, of course, men are disincentivized to take responsibility when the responsibility comes with no rights and no benefits. So
yeah, I mean, basically, if you have either financial or any kind of obligation that has no benefit to it, you're essentially a slave. Now, if it's voluntary participation, you're a charity worker. You are essentially participating in charity work for someone who you get nothing. Maybe you get personal satisfaction, although I don't really believe that there is any such thing as true altruism. All supposed altruism has a benefit to the person providing benefits to somebody else. I, for example, give money to Medicine Sans Frontières. Do I do it because I'm a good person? Yeah, that argument might be made, but if I'm honest with myself, I realize that I do it because it provides me with personal satisfaction. That's the benefit. I get a benefit by giving to Medicine Sans Frontières. It's not that I am this saintly human being who wants to just give free money away or free medical resources. No, I do it because it makes me feel good. It's directly beneficial to me to do that. But when we look at, and when I was writing the opening monologue for this show tonight, I was thinking about different matriarchal or pseudo-matriarchal models that exist in the world today, and one of them is the federally subsidized, in the English subsidized system of housing that gives housing and education and child care benefits to single mothers and provides them with council housing and so on. That is a pseudo-matriarchy to me. It's not a true matriarchy in that it's a society without this top-down control. I mean, you have men operating in the government, acting as white knights, acting as these kind of enforcers of the matriarchy, where money is being, apparently I'm breaking up. Not much I can do about that. Where money is being moved from one person to another, but it's still an enforced matriarchy where money is being taken from men or from everybody in the form of taxation and redistributed to single motherhood, which essentially incentivizes single motherhood. And if anybody looks at the statistics of what the results are for children of fatherless single motherhood, it's fairly disastrous. In fact, it's almost guaranteed to perpetuate a large percentage of the population in the next generation being unproductive members of society who are a drain on that system. And if you aren't paying attention, can be used to justify these continued social programs. Rather than ameliorating it, it actually aggravates it.
Oh, of course. It's actually a system that feeds into itself because not only are kids of single mother households, and I would argue that it would be single parent households, except there is evidence that kids do better in single father households than in single mother households. But you have all of this evidence that they are at an extreme statistical disadvantage compared to the average in all kinds of social maladies. And one of those maladies is the risk of becoming teen parents and becoming single parents. So you look at how that snowballs over maybe 2, 3, 4 generations as those teen parents and those single parents beget more teen and single parents, and how right now what we have is a system where men are involuntarily supporting women through the higher tax burden and through enforceable measures like child support and alimony and things like that. And but the next generation, the men are going to be slightly less productive, and the next generation after that, men are going to be even less productive, and generationally as well, as more single mother households take hold, girls are going to end up being more and more teen parents, teen mothers, and single mothers, and therefore more dependent on the state. So you have fewer people paying into the system, more people needing to take out, and it just is, in no way is it sustainable. And the only way that I can imagine that it would be workable is if you either were jailing huge numbers of men at extremely low cost per individual, or if you just eliminated them altogether.
Well, I think if you jail them, it doesn't really matter how low the cost is. Jailing them is more expensive than having them out on the streets. But this is kind of the snowball effect that we've talked about as what comes out of a matriarchy. Because if you, first of all, you de-incentivize, you actually create social disincentives in your culture for men to actually be responsible, productive members of society by segregating them, by providing this easy means of exclusion from the family, that if a man becomes a father, he can be easily shunted aside by manipulation through the family courts, and his income can be garnished so that some of his productive value is retained. Well, as soon as he's separated out of the family, then what is the motivation? Why would he continue to participate? Why would he continue to provide productive resources to people who have excluded him from his own family?
This is really it. And this is one of the most frustrating things for me is with the divorce rate is that, and one of the things with me when I was making that decision was that I was not just breaking up my marriage. I was breaking up my family. And I needed a serious, serious reason to do that. And I think that so many people now see it as you're just breaking up a marriage. You know, it's just the contract between the man and the woman, and the children. They don't really factor into the decision at all anymore. And this is just one of the things that just blows me away is that we're talking about the breakdown of marriage when in reality we should be talking about the breakdown of families.
Well, I mean, it has not been a secret that at least second-wave feminism had as one of its major and repeatedly stated goals the destruction of the family. a lot of the literature makes very explicit mention of this. And
James,
James, our producer,
a big fan of,
James, our producer, I think has something to add here. James, go ahead.
I did want to mention one thing about it costing to keep men in prisons. We did cover recently, and it's been brought up in national news recently as well, how there are private businesses that are losing government contracts to produce goods to prison contracts, where they literally force the men who are in the prison system to produce whatever goods the government decides they want them to produce. Keep in mind that is a method for extracting labor from men that they no longer deem to be useful within a bureau or system where essentially women are married to the state. I could easily see that working long term.
It is the ultimate expression of regarding men not as human beings, but simply as units of utility, units of production, where we're going to produce a culture where men become increasingly disenfranchised. They're disenfranchised from the family. There's no security in becoming part of a family because you can be quickly and easily discarded. You're disenfranchised from the educational system by increasingly female-favoring affirmative action, funding, financing, and a curriculum that is tailored to a female approach to learning that is oppositional to a male approach to learning. You're going to produce an ever-growing segment of the male population who is unemployed and unemployable in any but the most menial of tasks. So what do you do when you have this massive male population who are basically have no pathway to real adult self-actualization? You're going to have what happened in London, which is a social convulsion. Now, I'm going to try very hard this episode of the show to steer away from these discussions, because whenever we talk about economics and collapsing economies, this is where we always end up. But when we talk about a matriarchy, whether it is a natural matriarchy that occurs sort of at the village level, where women, by tradition or by law, have stewardship of the children and exclude men. Men then, their paternity, their fatherhood of children, they never really know if they are the father, so what is the motivation for them to continue to provide resources to the family unit? In a more artificial top-down sort of matriarchy, such as in the UK, where the state comes in, takes money from people by force through taxation, and I'm not just being hyperbolic when I say that. Taxation is the removal of your wealth by force. That's what the government does, is it moves money around using force and gives it to people to incentivize certain behaviors, such as single motherhood, by providing housing, by providing child care, by providing daycare, and so on. They have not incentivized families to stay together. They've incentivized the opposite. And anybody paying attention to the social sciences in this realizes the drastically negative outcomes that this produces for children coming out of those single-parent families. Even a single-father family without a mother present in the system is a better environment for children when you look at the statistical long-term results for children in terms of their educational outcomes, in terms of staying out of jail, in terms of becoming productive, educated, stable members of society. So this incentivized single motherhood is going to produce more of the same, depending on whose interests you're looking at. If you want to have a reason to maintain an ever-increasing scope of government power, as long as you can keep people distracted from the fact that this system itself is producing that negative outcome, thus more of this system produces more of that negative outcome. If you can keep people distracted, you can grow the scope of your government continuously. I need more funding next year. I need more funding in the year after. We need more ministers to do this. We need more local offices to administer these housing vouchers and educational vouchers, and more law enforcement to deal with this ever-growing population of young men who are disenfranchised, excluded from education, unemployed, and unemployable, and with nothing to do except get in trouble. Where does this take us? We talked about subculture early in the show.
Well, one thing that gets me is that when you look at what used to be considered attractive in a man, say in just a sort of a society where marriage is strong, and it was somebody who was stable. It was somebody who was a good provider. I mean, even if you look at some of the icons of sexuality, male sexuality in media. Way back when it was the Humphrey Bogarts and things like that. I mean, he was not a muscular man. He was not even an extremely masculine on the surface. He didn't have the big square jaw. He didn't have the pecs and the abs and all of that. And then you look at what seems to be attractive for women now, those kinds of male sex objects, and a lot of them, especially within subcultures, or within portions of the culture, such as the black community, where 60% of children are born to single mothers, and where there is a huge amount of social upheaval and social unrest and all of that, high incarceration rates, major disenfranchisement across the board, and sort of a kind of an atmosphere of implicit violence. It's almost like living in almost a war zone. And you look at what's attractive within that culture, and you're looking at, gangster rappers and these massively muscular, aggressive, assertive men. And when you look at the environment that exists within that culture, and the sort of the implicitness of the sort of the undercurrent of violence and risk and danger that is just pervasive across that community, the uncertainty and the unrest and all of that. And you look at what kind of men the women in that culture are attracted to. It's not the stable provider. It's whoever is toughest. It's whoever could bash the most amounts of heads. It's whoever can muscle their way in. Those are the, and this is something that happens across the board anytime that there's a major social upheaval where there's any amount of violence, an atmosphere of violence, a culture of violence, or an undercurrent of violence where you have women all of a sudden switching their criteria from the stable, responsible man who might, be, I guess, he might not have good muscle tone, but he goes to work every day, to this kind of epitome of hypermasculinity and aggression that is kind of inherent in what you call thug culture, right?
Well, I mean, it's easy to see where this comes from. If you disenfranchise men, if you exclude them from higher education through social programming, through incentivization of female-favoring finances, through excluding them from the family by innovation in the family law, the pathway to male self-actualization has to be a subculture, has to be quasi, semi, or even fully criminal behavior. And criminal behavior is rule by brute force. So the guys on the top of their own social hierarchy are not going to be socially or economically responsible guys who are the good father figure. They're going to be the bad boy. They're going to be the 50 Cent type of character.
Well, and then when those are the fathers of the majority of the children, then what does the next generation look like genetically?
Well, it's going to escalate. It's going to escalate. Yeah. And this is where we have to recognize that even before we get there, even before we get to this type of culture where male self-actualization, the only viable pathway to social acceptance for men, where you're not called a loser, where you're not just some social outcast
and picked on and exploited, and yeah.
then in a system like in the UK, where you have the government appropriating wealth through taxation, I'm not going to go too far into the violence inherent in that system, but by moving money from the taxpayer to single mothers, incentivizing single motherhood, and disincentivizing involvement for fathers, this system is guaranteed, absolutely guaranteed, to increase the level of violence in a society. Because the pathway to male self-actualization is thug culture, which is inherently violent. And so you then are going to turn around and look at your produced society, which is produced by this incentivization, and say, oh, look at all of these men who are footloose and fancy-free, unemployed, uneducated, unemployable, out robbing stores or hanging out on the street corner and intimidating the shoppers. We need to have an even more stringent crackdown on this runaway masculinity. Obviously, men are all bad. We can see it. Look at them. Look at them. Just look at these guys. They're bad. We're going to escalate this problem rather than address it by creating the only possible pathway to male self-actualization for young men to become adults. It's going to be increasingly thuggish, increasingly subculture, criminal or violent behavior. Now, this can't go on for too long. At some point, the carrying capacity of your society through taxation, you have an increasingly smaller segment of the male population actually being productive. What happens when this whole thing, when you can't keep paying, when there's no more money, when it becomes
too top heavy, when the triangle turns on its point, and you have too many people on the top resting on the too few people on the bottom.
Yeah, and I will hazard to state that we're very close to that right now. And the possible outcome, the likely outcome, is basically looking at something like a warlord model of local regional government, where you will not have the organizational or the infrastructural capability to have central government. You will have, and when I say warlord, I mean, if you go to Haiti or Somalia. Somalia is a good example of the warlord model of regional government. It's a thug culture taken to the farthest extreme. When you look at it happening, go ahead.
No matter how things go politically and how things are economically, might still ends up making right. And when you've disenfranchised men to the point where 80% of them, and frankly, so many of the polygamous cultures that have existed through history, they were only really capable of maintaining any kind of social stability because there were periodic and frequent purges of their excess male population, the ones that had no hope of having wives or children, purging them through conflict with their neighbors. And so these were population controls on the male population in order to prevent enough bored, disenfranchised, marginalized young men from just getting frustrated and angry and starting to act out all over the place.
Yeah. I have heard some feminists talking about matriarchal cultures in East Africa or in North Africa, and talking about these cultures with praise, as if these are wonderful cultures, even pointing out that most of the males in these cultures may have been killed off in warfare, and consequently, with a reduced male population, the women made community-friendly decisions.
Oh, yeah. The men get mostly killed off, then the women get into politics and start making community-friendly decisions. I think what they're defining as community-friendly are give women what they want.
Yeah, I mean, if you've eliminated men from the community, then I guess your decisions are community-friendly if they service women.
Yes.
The myopic and, frankly, brutal behind that thinking, honestly, it spins my head around. It blows my mind that anybody can look at eliminating a population through allowable murder, through constructed warfare. Oh yeah, we'll have tribal wars, and the men will mostly get killed off, and then everything will be fine.
Well, the thing that gets me is that this is how a lot of people in power have controlled population. I was reading a book called All the Trouble in the World by P.J. O'Rourke, who used to write for National Lampoon, and he's just an extremely smart fellow, and he mentioned that when it comes to famine, pretty much every famine that has occurred through recorded history, there's been plenty of food. The Irish potato famine and Ethiopian famine and back in the 80s and all of these famines, people starving in Somalia, there's always been plenty of food. The British government, the UK government had plenty of food stockpiled during the Irish potato famine. But they saw denying those people food as a way of dealing with a troublesome population. These are the tactics that governments and same with in Somalia, where you had huge warehouses full of food being guarded by people with guns, and the hungry ordinary folks were prevented from being able to access that food. And, probably it may even be that half of the food rotted while it was being guarded and, to keep it away from the people that were undesirables. We just want them to go away, and the easiest way is to just prevent them access to food so that they starve.
Yeah.
And so, these kind of population controls have been done across the board, all through history, by people in power who just want to get rid of troublesome populations. And the one thing that worries me is that when you have a situation like in Rwanda back, several years ago, when you have that kind of genocide, it's one tribe against another tribe. It's one group against another group, and the group that is being exterminated is a limited group, right? There are only so many of them. And there's nothing on the scale of what we would be considering talking about with gender. And on top of that, there's outrage the moment that women and children start dying. There's all kinds of global outrage the moment that women and children start being included in these genocides. And this is not the case with men. When you look overwhelmingly at the victims of any genocide, those victims are men.
They hide the fact, they like to hide the fact that men have died or are dying or are being killed by wrapping their humanity inside the title of their jobs. When a mine collapses, it's not men who are dying in the mine; it's miners. When the Horizon oil platform caught on fire and fell into the ocean, I think it was a dozen. It wasn't men who died; it was oil workers who died. So we hide the fact that human beings are killed. But of course, if women are killed, they're still women, and if children are killed, they're still children. Unless they are male children, in which case I guess they're students.
If they're male, they're teenagers, or they're youths, or they're insurgents, or they're rioters, or they're there's some kind of gender neutral term. And with the genocides in both Rwanda and in Bosnia, when you look at the victim count by gender, and you look at some of the tactics used by the victims in Rwanda and in Bosnia, where boys and even grown men were trying to disguise themselves as women to avoid being murdered. And then you look at the justification for the genocidal slaughterers choosing a 2-year-old boy for for the machete rather than a grown woman, an adult woman. And it's the justification for that is if we require our genocidal slaughterers to hack women and girls to pieces, they will become overburdened with guilt and trauma. But
a small boy is
2-year-old boys are fair game.
Yeah. We're going to briefly change topic here. We've got someone who's called into the show who has had a negative experience, I may be grotesquely understating events to say so, but who has been victimized possibly by the Violence Against Women Act.
Oh, dear.
Caller, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hello?
Hello, yeah, can I get you to turn the volume down on the show so you don't get feedback?
I just did.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, is this JTO?
This is JTO.
How are you doing tonight? This is a VAWA victim calling from Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm actually a follower of your videos, so I watched, I believe, all of your videos.
Thank you.
And I have to say that I really enjoy watching them. What drew my attention was the video you made about the girl, I forget her name, that you thought was a sociopath by the story she told.
Oh, yeah, Rebecca Watson. Apparently that drama is continuing to unfold because her white knight, and I have no compunction in calling him a white knight, that is a mindless, unthinking, knee-jerking, reflexive, thinking with his reptile brain rather than his forebrain, defender of a woman simply because she's a woman, not because she's making a good point or, has any intelligence of her own, is continuing to attempt to portray me as a woman hater, sociopath, psycho, I'm not sure what else. Lots of fun terminology being thrown about, which honestly makes me laugh because this is a person who continues to be a public speaker at a yearly event called the Skepticon, Skeptic Convention. It is the farthest thing from skeptical in the world to blindly accept a religion which, rather than having the God of the Bible at the top of it, has the idea that women are some sort of creatures who do not have character failings, who are innately innocent and universally victimized, and it's all rather sad and pathetic.
Yeah, absolutely. But that is not what I am to talk about. What I noticed from that video is that you began to realize that there are sociopaths in society.
Oh, yes.
And sociopaths definitely have no empathy. So, even if they, if they have learned moral values, they would not obey by them or behave by them. But there's another thing that I have, out of the research that I've been doing, I came to learn. And that is that moral values are definitely something that we learn. We learn it from our parents. We learn it from the people around us, and we can learn it by reading books or going to some class somewhere. If there was classes on moral values. But what I believe is that a person is not born with moral values. So if we stop teach moral values, we would, humanity, human beings would become savages, uncivilized.
Well, I think that there's probably a combination of factors. I think we are social animals. When we naturally form into groups, we are able to cooperate with one another and form allegiances and put aside our own immediate desires in benefit of the desires of or the benefits of the group. when we are a naturally cooperative species. We are not solitary animals in the way that some animals are. So I think a lot of the basis for human morality or human ethics comes from natural behavior because of our social dynamics of being social animals. When we start going into more complex ethical or moral questions, yes, I think there is definitely a component of learning and socialization there, but I don't really believe that we are truly savage at our core without a socialization. I think there is an element of social behavior that is innate in us, simply because of our environmental background.
One thing that
let's continue this line of thought. If you watch very early societies, several thousands of years ago, I guess what we can see there is people living in small groups, but if there's any issue like somebody, for example, taking someone else's wife, that could result in murder, or someone stealing something, there would definitely be a lot of violence, when that happened. And even though it's not completely savage, perhaps in your definition, it is a lot more, or it was a lot more savage than society is today.
Well, the definition, I think, of violence back, say, 100, 200, even, 200 years ago, was very different from what we would categorize as violence now. Back in Lord Blackstone's era, when he was doing his compendium of the law in the UK, his definition of what was permissible for a husband to do to his wife to correct her behavior was that he was not allowed to use violence or physical restraint. But at the same time, at that time, men were perfectly within their rights to physically chastise or correct their apprentices or their children or their servants or anyone else that they were answerable for or accountable for. And so I think that really, like what we might consider violence in this day and age, like a slap or a push or a shove or something like that, would have been not considered to be violence back even just 100 years ago. Just like what we would consider to be a horrible, horrible thing to do to children. 100 years ago, we were putting them in fields to pick cotton for 12 hours a day at age 3. So, our values have really changed, have really shifted over time, and we've become, I think, as a whole, a lot more aware of violence and trying to be kind to each other and things like that. But when I think of the development of empathy, it's usually around age 3 or 4 that children start to develop an understanding and an ability to put themselves into the experience of another person. So if they see a child who's got a skinned knee or something, they will be able to actually think to themselves, what would that be like if that was me? That would feel really horrible. And so empathy, in that you can sort of put yourself in somebody else's shoes, is one thing, but morality is something entirely different. Morality is the ability to care. And I think one thing that we don't necessarily realize about, say, sociopaths who we say lack empathy, they may indeed have a complete and full ability. In fact, I think sadistic sociopaths have a full ability to empathize, to put themselves in the position of, say, the victim that they're harming, and know what that person is going through and understand it and kind of visualize it, and they just don't care. They don't have the morality. And morality is a much more complex thing than empathy.
Okay, yeah, I agree with everything you said, but I'm trying to make a point. So, let's move on. What I'm trying to say is that if you go through history and we look at how civilization has developed, we can see that the definition of morality has developed with it. So through books, through teachings, it was part of school. And the development of morality is what I believe had a big part in the development of civilization. What we've seen, pretty much since, I don't know exactly when it happened, but let's just mention a couple of things that are relevant. And obviously, the invention of the pill, of the contraception, and then obviously, the beginning of feminism and liberation of women. And when we talk about women's lib, then I always ask myself, liberation from what? I mean, liberation means, become free. So become free from what? And
I think I can answer that. That's a great question, because that's really the second part of this show, is that we want to ask the question, what is the implication of continued hypergamy in a society that increasingly exempts women from accountability for their own actions?
Well,
we're going to.
I think.
But before
I think the essence.
Okay, go ahead.
The essence of women's liberation has always been freedom from biological determinism, freedom from biological destiny. That's really, and the pill is what delivered that. Where women were allowed to choose because they were not burdened by their biology to take on a specific role.
Well, again, I agree with you, but let me add one more thing. I believe that on top of that, there was something else they were liberating themselves from, and that is moral behavior. They wanted to liberate themselves from moral behavior, and that's why we have slut walks. But let's just, I'm trying to make a point here, so let's move on. The next step is that I'm going to say is as what we've seen, and by the way, in my case, I was falsely accused. So false accusations is definitely something that is against morals, against what I call moral values.
You shall not bear false witness. Yes.
Yeah. So, and by the way, when you talk to any women's organization and any women's organization or the government or violence against women, the Office of Violence Against Women or shelter workers, they will tell you that they almost encourage, not encourage, but support false accusations by women against men. And
it's not about sparing the feelings of the accused. If this is her only means to empowerment, then so be it.
I tell you what they told me, and this is it. If false accusations are necessary in order to help women, or in order to whatever, this is about restraining men. Okay, so if false accusations are necessary in order to restraining men, so be it. So they support.
Where did you hear that? That's really who. I would like to know who told you that.
A social worker actually a few of them, and even the government. There was a conference called by the White House about violence against women, and I called in and I asked the questions about false accusations and VAWA immigration fraud, and this is the answer that I got.
It's collateral damage and a small price to pay for the greater good.
Exactly.
Yeah,
only they don't realize. But if you don't mind, let me move on because I got a point here.
Nope. Well, hang on a second. No, hang on. Sorry, I'm just going to mute your mic here because you are more or less taking over the show, and we do have other stuff we want to talk about. So I'm going to just put your mic live again, but so you know I've got to actually say a few things. The idea that false accusations create automatic collateral damage, and that's totally acceptable. But that's just, we're fine with that. That's the price we're all willing to pay to churn men through this machine simply to elevate women has a couple of social implications. The most significant one, the one that everybody seems to ignore, is that in this model of thinking, women are not self-actualized human beings. They are objects to be acted on. Now, this is coming from a feminist point of view, which disenfranchises them far more than any kind of oppression from a hypothetical patriarchy could ever possibly do.
Feminism is the biggest objectifier of women, for sure.
Yeah. Now, we're going to take a quick break here because we've got to actually pay a few bills. We're going to take a music break, and I'm going to say a few things, and then after that, I want to talk about hypergamy and what it means in terms of being a modern as opposed to a primitive human being. And we'll be back in just a few minutes.